In the center.
It's like a city block.
Yeah.
It's like a city block.
Okay. All right. Well, we can start now. It's time. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. So we left off on page 77, and we just read Basil the Great. And so now it's Abba Bisarion. And so the one this very first one, Bisarion 1, 77 and 78, where his disciple said to Abba Visario, I'm thirsty, and there's no water. They're in the desert, and they're walking by the ocean, by the sea. And then he said, oh, drink from the sea. So he made a prayer and drank, and then made the water, not salty, so they could drink from the sea. And then the poor guy, the disciples start filling up his bottle with the water from the sea, so they'll have more for later. And his was like, what are you doing? Oh, I want some for later. He's like, what? You think God can't do the same miracle again for us? So yeah, it's just like, so it's really tangible. I mean, it's really moving how vividly God is present and accessible to these holy fathers. But even and this is something we see in all the saints, but even right from the very beginning, how like when Adam and Eve were in paradise, they heard God walking. But even Cain and Abel, and how they, even after Cain sinned, God was still there talking with them. And so yeah, so God is very close, and he's very accessible. It's just that we are far from him. We distance ourselves, and then it put a distance between us. And then there are a few more examples here in Visario number 2, how he had to cross a river, so he just walked on it, just like he's like walking on water, like Christ did. And then another time, the number 4 here again, his disciple was thirsty in the desert, and so he went with he took his sheepskin and went a stone's throw away, and then prayed, and then he came back, the sheepskin was full of water, and he drank. And so yeah, so it's just really beautiful how powerful their prayer is. And I'll share with you a humorous story about someone I once heard for confession. I might have told you this already, but there was a young guy came to me confession once back in Arizona. He was about 14 years old, and I could tell from the way he was confessing, he really knew what the spiritual life is all about, and it was clear he had read a lot of spiritual books or whatever. Anyways, so at the end of the confession, I read him the prayer of forgiveness, and he said, "You know what I want to be when I grow up?" I said, "No, what do you want to be?" I said, "I want to be a monk." And I said, "Oh, well, that's very nice. I'm happy to hear that. But what makes you want to be a monk?" He says, "Because monks get superpowers." He's been reading all these, these Desert Fathers and Saint Pius, how they get all these miraculous. So of course, I said, well, yes, it's possible. Yes, some monks definitely do get superpowers, but that shouldn't be like the only reason. Yeah. So okay, and then he goes, and then this abbot Bisarion is making all these miracles, really. So number 5 now. There's someone possessed with a demon, and they knew that he would be too humble to actually cast him out. So they said, "Oh, I know. Let's just do this trick where we'll pretend this demon possessed person is asleep, and you need to come wake him up." And so then they tricked him to saying, "Okay, get up and go out," because he was in the church there, and then so immediately the demon goes out of the person, even though that's not what Abba said. Yeah, and there's another similar situation. I can't remember if it's coming up. Yeah, where someone this Abba said, okay, a person brought his dead son and brought him in front of the saint, and they both did a prostration, and the dead boy didn't get up. Of course, the saint said, "Okay, get up, anastasi, get up," and so he rose from the dead. And so yeah, so it's really fascinating to see how God will will ratify the words of these saints, even if they don't even know what they're saying really. And this ties in with what I was saying just last Sunday in my homily in church, how that there's a saying, "Ipakui andi ipakuis," God listens to those who listen to Him. So when we listen to God and we follow all His commandments, well, then God's going to listen to us whenever we ask Him something.
I have a question. What I've read before in the Fathers that it says sometimes that the possessed, like there has to be some level of consent, like free will, but like
Yeah,
that's
a
not
consent of what?
like for the demon to be cast out. But then I was like, how is that
So
even possible?
mean the person needs to consent to the
Yeah,
person?
I was reading some sort of article and it was a modern priest and they were saying, somebody was
Yeah.
saying we need to get the possession out, the demon
Yeah.
out, but the person doesn't want to come
Yeah,
for
yeah.
prayers. So I was just curious like how that worked because they just sort of drove,
They tricked them, sort of, yeah. Yeah, and this is well, one thing we say in general about when we pray for someone is that it's if we're praying for someone, let's say cut smoking or to come to church more or whatever, but if that person themselves really doesn't want to cut smoking or really doesn't want to whatever it is, then our prayers really won't be effective. And so that's why many times when the people go to the saints or like Saint Pius or whatever, they would say, "Oh, pray for me that I whatever do get past this difficulty or get better at this." And Saint Pius would say, "Well, yes, I'll be praying for you, but if you yourself don't really want it, if you yourself aren't praying and really trying, my prayers aren't going to do anything." And so yeah, so that is a part of how things work. Yeah. Okay, and then number 7. And this is a very sweet one. This is a brother who sinned was put out of the church by the priest. And so then Abba Bisarin also got up and went out with him saying, "Yeah, I'm also a sinner." Yeah, and it just very sweet how what kind of tenderness these people had, and also a realization, a very vivid realization of how they are sinners, how we have gone against God's will, and even these people who are miracle workers have a sense of, yeah, I'm still a sinner. Yeah, but then this Abba Visarion in the number 8, it says, "For 40 years I never laid myself down, but slept either sitting or standing." Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, that's well. First of all, I mean, I can imagine someone sitting and sleeping, but standing and sleeping. That's unless you're like in the corner, like standing up. But yeah, even so, it's but the really question is, why would these saints, torture themselves like this? And so it's well, of course, we just have these glimpses, and we don't know why this particular saint did this, but we know that other saints would do it for other kinds of reasons. For example, one reason that like Saint Joseph Hesychast, there was a time for 8 years where because he wanted to fight like wholeheartedly against the demons, God allowed him to have very intense carnal warfare, and so he couldn't fall asleep without having a big temptation. So what he would do is he wouldn't even lie down; he would just sleep while sitting. So that's one reason. But another reason is because many of these saints had so intense prayer and so much they're so in love with God that they couldn't stand being apart from Him, even taking a break, even to sleep. And so what they would do is they would devise tricks to keep themselves awake as many of the hours as possible in the 24-hour period. So one thing they would do is they would make a staff, like a something to hold themselves up with. It's in the shape of a T, and so they would be leaning on this and standing upright while they're praying. And then if they fell asleep, of course they would just fall over and wake up again. Or another other monks and matas, they would make a stool that instead of having 3 or 4 legs, it would have only one leg. And so what that means is you have to be balancing And so as soon as you fall asleep, you'll lose your balance and wake up. So yeah, and other people even have these ropes attached to the ceiling, and it would be like a harness, so that they would be supported by the ropes that are attached to the ceiling. That way they'd be able to stand up and not fall over. So yeah, so these are really, these are very extreme kinds of things. And for us, it's not even thinkable. Well, I mean, we can't even imagine what would it be like to try to stay awake like more than 20 hours a day just so we can pray more. But for these people, it was a very natural kind of thing, just because they had so much joy and intense connection with Christ that it was even sweeter than sleep. And there's what Saint Gregory the theologian, he even said that, he says sleep is sweet, but nothing is sweeter than prayer. So of course this doesn't apply to most of us. For most of us, sleep, at least for me, sleep is the most sweet thing for me. But once you get to this certain level of prayer where it can be so intense and so sweet, that you just lose your desire even to sleep. And that's sort of also like how my abbot at Mount Athos was, who passed away last year, Ephrem. He was someone he would sleep maybe 1 or 2 hours in a 24-hour period, because he had this intense prayer, this unceasing prayer, and he just couldn't tear himself away from it. He didn't want to. So yeah, so these things, of course, these are the kind of things that we can't force to happen. But it's just inspiring, at least, to see that there are these levels of intensity that people can reach. Okay, so then now Visario number 9 on page 80. He says, when you are at peace and not embattled, in other words, you're not having all sort of really strong temptations just making your life very difficult, but you're just at peace, well, then you should humble yourself even more, just in case some foreign joy arises in us and we boast and are delivered into battle. In other words, if we if we if we think to ourselves that, oh, now I'm okay, I've reached this passion, I've gotten broken through the clouds, and now I'm good to go, I'm I'm safe now. Well, then that's actually what's going to be our downfall. When we think we no longer are vulnerable, then that's when we will fall. So, but then God does not permit us to be embattled often, lest we be lost. Because in other words, God knows that we don't have the strength to have constant struggles, and for not to have any break at all. Okay, and now number 10, this Abba Visarion is asked for advice, and the elder says to him, maintain silence and do not measure yourself. And so I'm guessing what he meant was he's saying, don't compare yourself with others, because remember when we were reading Abba Dorotheos, he was saying how we should be keeping stock of ourselves and observing, how are we doing? Am I progressing or am I going back? How are my passions? Are they stronger or weaker? Which one's the strongest? So that kind of measuring ourselves is actually very important. But I believe what Abba Bisarion is probably talking about is comparing ourselves with other people and say, oh, well, I sleep only 3 hours. He sleeps 6 hours. I must be better than him. or same with fasting, or how long you're praying, or whatever, how quickly you're working. Yeah, and so that is the big, and that's something we can easily fall into too. And because it's easy for us to say, wow, I went to church today. All the other people that come only on Sunday, they must be really negligent. Wow. And so of course we get in ourselves like trouble like that. So yeah. All right. Yeah, and so then this next long one, this story of number 12, this is a little bit of a cryptic kind of thing where he would go when he would find some other good monastery. He would go out there and just weep and say, "Oh, I'm so lost. I fell into among pirates, and I suffered shipwreck, and I lost my status, and I'm no longer noble. I'm ignoble." And so the monks are saying, "Oh, well, he lost all this money. Maybe we can give you some of it." But then he just weep even more, and so it's cryptic. But I think I'm pretty sure he's speaking figuratively, that he wasn't really some nobleman and he really didn't have a shipwreck, but he's probably speaking about just with a lot of realization of, oh, I used to have so much more grace and now I'm not where I used to be, and now I'm and this is something that that many of the saints have experienced, where they would get a lot of grace from God, and they would experience what it's like to have that much grace and that intensity of love for Christ and peace and joy, and then for God to take away his grace, and then they're just really weeping and lamenting for that, and really yearning for it very intensely. And the reason why God does this, the saints are saying, is because what what Christ wants for us is what he wants us to love him wholeheartedly, and one way of doing that is to give us some foretaste of what our connection could be like, and then to step away. And the Holy Father say it is sort of like how a mother would train her little child to walk. She'd hold him by the hands and make him sort of walk, and then he thinks everything's fine and wonderful. Then she lets go, and then he like stumbles and wobbles, and so she slowly trains him in this way. And this is how they say the Holy Spirit trains us too. And this is something that not only the saints are going through, but also us as well, because we're not at their level. We're getting this intense connection with Christ and then losing it. But I'm sure all of us can think of times in our life when we had much more, when we were in a much better state, where we had more prayer, more humility, more zeal and love and patience and everything. And now, we don't have that, perhaps. And so, but that's also part of God's providence to help us to realize that, okay, yeah, there are ups and downs, and things could be much more beautiful if we just strive a little harder. So yeah, so that's why it says in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, I think it says, remember your first love. Remember this love you once had for Christ, that was so fulfilling and inspiring and strong, because just by remembering it, it can be something that can rekindle your zeal.
It can actually come back, or it's just one
Well,
sin
no,
and the
no,
next sin?
no, it definitely can come back. And because we see this very much in the lives of the saints, how there are saints that had, in very lofty levels, and then they lost it, but then they got it back again. Like one example is Saint Avramios and his niece Maria. How Marie, so Saint Avramios was a monk, a hermit, living by himself, and his brother died when his brother's daughter was still an infant, really young, and so he inherited this baby girl, and so he just took care of her. He raised her up, and of course, being a hermit, a monk, he taught her everything about monasticism, so she became a nun from a very young age. But then, but because the Saint Avramius was a miracle worker, there are people coming all around to come and see him. And there was one guy that came to see him, and when he was there, he saw his niece, who was a pretty young nun, and so he fell in love with her and he seduced her. And then she gave up and said, "Oh well, now that I've fallen, it's all over." So she was just left entirely. And Saint Abramius had a vision that he had just before she just before she did when she disappeared. He had a vision that he had a beautiful white dove, and then a dragon came and snatched away from him, and then it was all dirty and black. But then he attacked the demon and got the dove out, and is all clean and white again. So then he ended up going back into the world and finding her and bringing her back to the monastery, and she got back on track and she regained her previous state. But yeah, there are other saints like that too. There are even really extreme situations. Like there's one monk who um what happened? Oh yeah, and I don't know, maybe there's even in this book. I can't remember it's telling this book, but there's a monk who was again a miracle working elder out in the desert, and some man came with his beautiful young daughter and said, "Oh, my daughter's possessed. Can you heal her?" And he said, "Okay, I'll pray for her." And so the man left his daughter with him, and he prayed, and he was able to cast out the demon from her. but then the demon got revenge and attacked him with a lot of carnal thoughts, and he ended up falling with her. And then when he realized that he had fallen, he was felt so guilty, embarrassed. He also failed to murder. He actually murdered this girl. So it was just like total, like from the most holy to the worst possible sins. But then of course this person realized, wow, that this is such a crime, such a huge sin. What am I doing? And so he just repented very intensely. I mean, we can't even imagine what kind of repentance he must have had. But then he did get back to his former state. So yeah, so it just goes to show that even if you commit the worst sin in the world, you can still there's always repentance. The Holy Father say the only sin God won't forgive is a sin that we're unwilling to confess and repent for. So yeah. All right. So anyway, moving on to Abba Benjamin. Yeah, so he has several stories here about how they were so strict there with that they wouldn't even use any oil in their food for years even. And so again, this is just this kind of intense kind of sacrifice. And it seems almost like masochistic or like sadistic, like to be like to be like inflicting so much hardship on yourself. But the reason why these holy fathers did this was because they had, as we were saying last week, how they had this very keen sense of how God's presence was. God was much more tangibly present with them when they were going through a lot of suffering. And so they were choosing this kind of very difficult path because they knew that God would be there to console them. So it's a real testament to what faith they had, and also how close they were to God. They would feel His grace, and it would fill them in this way. Okay, and then last one on 82, Viaris. A monk asked him. Someone asked, "What should I do to be saved?" And he says, "Go make your belly small and your handiwork little. Be not troubled in your cell, and you are being saved." And so, okay, we understand this idea of making your belly small. Okay, that's pretty clear from everything else we've seen so far. But then your handiwork little. In other words, they're saying, yes, do some handiwork, but don't get so caught up in it. And the way Saint Paisius of the Holy Mountains would say, he says, give your hands and your feet to your work, but not your heart. In other words, yes, it's fine to work hard at what you're doing, but don't give your heart to it because your heart needs to be for God. And that's why also like St. Joseph the Hesychast, when he was doing his handiwork with carving wooden crosses, he intentionally made them very simple and didn't make them very elaborate because he knew that would make his mind too attracted to this and too occupied with this. Whereas if he keeps them kind of simple and boring, he'll just keep his mind on Christ himself. So yeah, so these people, all these saints, they have this very otherworldliness there, and that sort of dictated their whole program, their whole way of life. Okay, so now moving on to 83 Gamma, Gregory the Theologian. And so here's another cryptic saying. He says, "The entire life of man is but a single day for those who labor with longing." So well, I'll ask you guys, what did you guys make of this? Any guesses on what he's talking about?
It goes by too quickly. That like
Yeah.
so if you're laboring with longing, your life is gonna go by too quickly because you are
Yeah.
struggling so much for Christ and you're still not getting
Yeah. So it's, I mean, the modern way of saying it is like time flies when you're having fun. So so when if you're laboring with longing, in other words, you're loving this spiritual story, you're loving prayer, you're loving this being connected with Christ and being devoted in this way. Well, then you're just so into it that like just time goes by
Mhm.
before, yeah. And so I think that's what he is talking about. Yeah. Okay. All right, so now the next one is Abba Gelasios, and he has some, these are really, yeah, he has some really fascinating stories here. The nice thing about Abba Gelasios is that it's not just these little snippets, but there's like the whole background, the whole story, so you get a sense of who he is and what he's. Yeah, so this first story where he has Abba Gelasios as this New Testament. Oh no, sorry, the whole of the Old and New Testaments. So this is worth 18 pieces of gold. I mean, that'd be like, I don't know how many, maybe like dozens, I mean, like I don't know, like $50,000 in today, or I don't know what it would be, but that'd be a lot. That's just like super valuable. And so then someone steals it. And then the neat thing is that when he finds out who stole it, he doesn't even try to get it back. He doesn't even claim it as being stolen. And it just really remarkable how free from this passion of possessing he was. And of course this moved the thief very much as well. But then the next story is really a good sort of juxtaposes beautifully with the next story, because the next story where there's some little dwelling that some monk had, and these dwellings, I mean, they weren't, I mean, as you can probably guess, the way these monks lived was very rustically, and so their little cabin, their little hut in the desert, it just have like super bare minimum. It'd be like more like a shack than anything else. But then this incident where the governor wanted to get the land of the and the shack of this monk who used to be there, and Abiyash was, no way, you're not taking that. And he just dead set against it. And this is because there is a very strict rule in the Holy Father, in the canons of the church, that says something that belongs to a monastery, it's forbidden for that to be transferred into some and turn into some lay person's house and dwelling. And so, because it's like sacrilegious, like taking a church and then making it into like a factory or whatever. So in this kind of thing, Abba Yalaso was just like dead set against it. And he's just like totally, fighting for every step of the way to prevent this governor from getting control of this little shack. So and this, it just goes to show that these saints, they weren't pushovers. I mean, you think from the first story that, oh, this Abba Yalasi, he's a pushover. I can take advantage of him and all. He's an easy guy to fool or take advantage of. But then you see that, whoa, this guy is really tough. He means business.
What does it mean when it says he was put into a litter by them? By those
Oh,
with
what
him?
page are you? 85? Oh, okay.
I just didn't know vocabulary what that was back then.
Yeah, so a litter, I think the word litter, it's one of the things that rich people, it's like a carriage that it might be, I don't know if it's pulled by a horse or carried by people, but the people,
Oh,
okay,
Oh.
yeah, okay,
Or
yeah,
either on the medical side, they use litters, the stretcher, with four people carrying somebody on a stretcher, that's a litter.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
then, or where you had the Roman times, they on that
Cleopatra,
chair,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then again, Gelasios 3, 85 to 86,
this one.
where this monk gets so mad he kicks the guy who was eating the fish, and then accidentally kills the guy. But then Abba Gelasios says, okay, don't tell anybody. We'll just bring him to me into the church after everyone, and then we'll put him in the altar, and then I'll just pray for him, and he raises him from the dead. Yeah. And then this next one, Abba Gelasios number 4. This is pretty interesting. So what happened was there's a heretical bishop, Theodosios, that came and was trying to get up a talk with Abba Gelasios. And 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 he said he was not led astray by this, Abba Gelasios was not led astray by the apostasy of this bishop. And in fact, he even treated him with the dishonor he deserved. So he treated this bishop with dishonor and just sent him away and didn't even want to talk to him. And he says, and he says, if you want to discuss matters of faith, I don't have time to listen to you. Talk to this other guy. And so the reason why, I mean, it seems very cold-hearted and very, unloving, but this really is in the spirit of the Holy Fathers when it comes to heretics, because and even in the Bible itself, St. Paul says after in regarding heretics, after he says after a second or a third admonition, give up on them. And the reason for this is because there's nothing to gain by just having these endless arguments with people who are dead set in their ways. And not only is it not going to benefit them, but it could potentially harm us, because if this heretic is very eloquent, then this heretic could actually harm people by the things he could say, even if a person is sort of strong. In fact, I'll share with you a story of how Yarnda did this to a heretic, my mother. so what happened was, see, my mother would come to Arizona frequently, and she doesn't believe that God exists. And Yarnda would say I would tell Yarnda, oh, my mother's going to be here for the next 5 days, and Yarnda friend would say, oh, did she become Orthodox yet? And I said, no, she's really stuck in her ways. She's not easy to convince. And then he said, well, let me talk to her. I'll try to convince her. I'll try to convert her. I said, okay, Yarnda, but I'm warning you, it's not so easy. I've tried. He says, no, I'll do my best. So I said, okay. So he went to the women's guest quarters and spoke with her. It just so happened that I can't remember what happened. For some reason, I wasn't able to translate for them. So just the other women they were translating for them. So I don't know. I didn't witness it how it happened, but I can guess sort of how it happened. Well, and also my mother told me afterwards sort of how it went down. but anyway, Jan de Frem came back from that conversation and said to me, "Oh, your mother's a tough nut to crack." It's Biro Caribe, yeah. But then the humorous, so that's not that's not the scare. But then the part about him, the heretic part about her. So what happened was, so because she was there and very often, and people when people would ask her, oh, who are you, and she would say, oh, I'm Papa Frem's mother, and they'd say, oh, you're Papa Frem's mother. Oh, let me kiss your hand. Oh, how'd you do it? What's your secret to it? And then they would say, oh, what? And so you're also Orthodox, right? And then she'd say, no, I don't believe in God. And they're like, what? You don't believe in God? Why? And that was their big mistake. They shouldn't have asked why, because she's actually a very eloquent person, a very almost, I mean, she can defend a case like a lawyer. She can really, put out all the arguments, really, And so she explained exactly why she didn't believe in God to these poor old ladies. And then these poor ladies would come running to Yarnda Frem. Yarnda, my faith is shaken. I talked with Papa Frem's mother. and so Yarnda Frem had to tell my mother, you don't have a blessing to talk about religion when you're here in the monastery because you're. So yeah, so.
Is she still alive?
Yeah, she is. Yeah, she's still. No. Yeah, she's still dead set again. Yeah. So, what can you do?
Maybe she's just mad that she lost her son.
Oh well, no, she's not. I mean, she was. Well, at first, when she was disappointed, she thought I was throwing my life away because I graduated from a good college. I had a good career ahead of me if I wanted it, but instead I went to monasticism, and she thought that was a waste. But then when she saw that, I was doing well in monasticism, that I was doing profitable, helpful things, and people respected me, and that and that I was happy. And they're saying, oh, she was saying, okay, well, if you're happy and you're doing good things, okay, well, I'm happy. I can be happy for you, even though I think you're living in a fantasy world, but so that's that. Yeah. Yes.
Out of curiosity, I think, would she be moved if she saw, let's say, a weeping eye? Or if she witnessed that? You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah,
at that
so-
point, would she, like, oh, there's something here that I know.
Yeah. So see, the problem is that she's so dead set on this idea that everything can be explained rationally, that if she did see a miracle, she would try to think of 1,001 rational explanations for it. So, and that, I mean, so, but it's true though that, but there are some miracles that are so beyond anything that really there is no rational explanation. There really can't be. So, but even those kinds of things, people, it just sort of human nature that they're dead. They can be so dead set in their ways that even if you have proof, they still refuse it.
It just reminds me of, I know, like, that it would go against other beliefs.
Yeah.
So in other words, if someone studied something for life, and dedicated to it, then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
they realize that they might be wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes their ego or something, you know what I mean, tries
Yeah.
to,
Prevent it.
come up with an excuse or try to, to not make it seem like all that.
Yeah, and that's very true, because when people make decisions, I mean, we all like to think of ourselves as being very, rational and logical when we make decisions. But the truth of the matter is that, and they've done studies on this, that when people make decisions, it's not only based on their rational thoughts, their prefrontal cortex, it's also based very much also on emotions. And depending on who you are, you might be much more leaning towards emotional decision making rather than rational decision making. But even the most rational person has some element of emotion in it. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of emotional baggage too in these kinds of things, because she had a very negative experience when she was young with religion. There's like an emotional kind of a very prominent emotional element to her rejection of religion. It's not completely rational, it's also emotional. And so even if I did have all the arguments and all the you know undoubtable miracles, still that emotional element would still be there.
But she doesn't believe in other God,
No, she just thinks
so
it.
that's good.
Yeah, so at least she's not.
Halfway there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have one thing I heard that had somebody's, once say, well, you guys in Chicago have really good priests. They're not like that in Greece. Like, it's like, come on. I don't know.
Chicago specifically, you said.
Yes, yes, so. I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say.
That you can't expect much of them because they don't have a
guess.
good leader.
I didn't really quite understand.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if we really do have better priests here than in Greece, but e- even if that's true, people can. Nowadays especially, we really don't have any excuse not to be well informed in our orthodoxy and inspired, because there's so much access to all the writings of the saints. There's so many and homilies. I mean, if your own priest isn't going to give you homilies, it's so easy to listen to other homilies, or if there isn't, let's say there isn't like a Bible study or book club in your church, wherever you are in the world, it's so easy to find these things, elsewhere, whether in book form or online form. So even though it would be easier to have it all right there in your lap, still people really can't make excuses for themselves. And I say that by myself too. I mean, we have access to everything. Okay. Yeah. So then now moving on to Gelasius 5 on page 87. Here's where there's a Abba Gelasius used to be a very ascetical person with a lot of deprivation, but then he ended up in a monastery where he had a lot of, a lot of material things and a lot of things to care about. And then one of his old buddies, when from in the old days when they were both, living really rustically, and came up and says, I'm worried about you, Father Gelasius, Abba Gelasius, that all your thoughts are too attached to all the material things you have, all the lands and the property and of the Cenobion. And then Abba Gelasius has this like rebuttal, this where like it sounds like he's one-upping him. He just says, your thoughts are more attached to the needle with which you work than are the thoughts of Gelasius to the property. and so it's I mean, obviously these people don't have the kind of ego we have, so it would be incorrect for us to attribute our sort of ego. So, oh yeah, well, you're probably like this, and you're like, So, but this he's saying this with a real sense of humility, I'm sure. And it's also I also find interesting how they talk about themselves in the third person. I guess it's just a different. I don't know if that's a cultural thing of the Coptic language or something, but anyway, yeah. And I remember Yaron the friend would quote this from Abba Gelasius, say, "Oh yeah, Abba Gelasius, he was so wonderful. He would have all these things to take care of, and he wasn't, and his thoughts weren't attached to it. But it's so hard being an abbot. I'm drowning in all of these things happening all right and left, So yeah, and so the thing, of course, is that when someone like Elder Frem says something negative about himself, it's sometimes hard to know, is this person really is that really a problem, or is it just sort of some kind of self-reproach that's not entirely true? I'm guessing it was true to some degree, but maybe not. Yeah, not to the degree that we would assume. But
See it in his letters in the councils where he would say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm going to hell, me first,"
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I got the sense it was like really like, and I was like, "Whoa, how does he do that?"
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, so now, let's see. Oh yeah, and then the last one of Abba Gelasius, so page 88, number 6. He has this. Evidently he was getting disturbed by being in the monastery there with all the cares, and he was harassed by his thoughts, his lo yizmi, to go back in the desert. And so in order to fight this thought, he pretends that he's in the desert. He starts living really rustically. So he sleeps outside under the open air, and he doesn't have any bread anymore. He just eats whatever wild, root of vegetables, and then and he has to constantly walk around. So after he wore himself for 3 days, he said, well, since I'm so worn out after this, I better not go back in the desert because it's too hard for me. And I'm just going to jump ahead to another story very similar to this. It's on page 219. I'll just read it because it's not very long. It says there's an Abba Olympius who was battled by pornea, by carnal thoughts, by sexual thoughts, and his thoughts said to him, go and take a woman, to go get married. So in order to fight these thoughts, he says he made some clay and made a clay person, like a snowman, but out of clay. And then he said, okay, here's your woman. But now that you've got her, you have to work twice as hard to feed both her and yourself. So he starts working twice as hard, laboring mightily. And then the next day, he put together some more clay and put it in the shape of a little baby. Says, now you got a daughter too. Now your woman has given birth. Now you need to work even more so you can feed and clothe your child. So he's working like 3 times as hard, and then he's like so exhausted. And then he says, well, if you don't have the strength to work this hard, don't go looking for a woman. And so then it says, when God saw his labor, he took the battle away from it and he experienced repose. So anyway. yeah, so it just goes to show how these monks would be very they would try to be very inventive in how to fight against these thoughts. They would say, "Oh yeah, you want this? Okay, here you have it," and then see what happens. And so but of course, God sees. But it's important that the way this last story ended, how it did end with by saying when God saw his labor, he took the battle away from him. In other words, all those sexual thoughts, and he experienced repose. So in other words, it's because this person, God saw he was doing whatever he could to fight against the thoughts, that God, had pity on him and gave him relief from the thoughts. And so yeah, so this for us too, if we're battled by any thoughts, whether it's gluttony or laziness or whatever it is, if we can show our good intention and try to resist and think in this way or that way or whatever way it might work, God can see this effort we're making and then give us some freedom from it. Okay, let's see now. Okay, so then now Abba Gerondios, um, he says many are those. He's talking about how it not only can you commit fornication by being with someone, but even in your mind without physical contact. And this is something that is was very important for especially for them, because in the desert they didn't have other women around except maybe that like one made of clay. So but still they still had temptations in their imagination, their thoughts. And so that's why he and many other Holy Father are saying, it's not enough just that we're not actually committing a sin with a woman. We have to actually keep our mind pure. And so like one of the Desert Fathers, Saint John Cassian, he quoted Saint Basil. He said, saying, "I do not know a woman. In other words, I've never been with a woman, but I am not a virgin." In other words, he realized that it's not enough just to keep yourself, physically pure from touching. But if you're in your mind, you're thinking about that, well, then you can, in a sense, lose your virginity in your mind. And so Saint John Cassian said, "Well, indeed, did he understand that the incorruption of the flesh consists not so much in abstaining from woman as it does in integrity of heart, which ever and truly preserves the incorrupt holiness of the body by both the fear of God and the love of chastity." But then St. Basil also says it's not only carnal thoughts, but really all the passions do. So he says, um, um, it is possible to commit fornication in speech and adultery with the eye, to be polluted through the hearing, to receive defilement in the heart, and to transgress the bounds of temperance by lacking control in partaking of food and drink. And then also he goes on to say anger, jealousy, bearing a grudge. He goes on, all these things, vain regard for one's appearance, conversations beyond what is necessary. All of these must be carefully avoided by one who has dedicated himself to God by virginity, because yielding to one of them is almost as perilous as committing an expressly forbidden sin. So, and this goes in line with this whole point that what Christ is trying to tell us, that what really matters is what's happening in our heart. And that's why he says, "Whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." But then the beautiful thing is what Saint Joseph Hesychast says. He says that this struggle for being chaste inwardly has so much power that it can make a person fragrant. And so this is what Saint Joseph said. He says, "When a person fights to keep his body pure and his mind chaste from dirty thoughts, his life and his prayer ascend like fragrant incense to the heavens. I have seen in practice what I am telling you. No sacrifice to God is more fragrant than chastity of the body, which is obtained with a bloody and dreadful struggle." And so with this bloody and dreadful struggle he's talking about is, like doing these things of making, a clay person and working 3 times as hard, or Saint Joseph, he would hit himself with a cane when he would have temptation. He says, "I have much to say about this blessed chastity, the fruit of which I have tasted and eaten. But you are not able to bear right now what I would say. Only one thing will I tell you now. when such people change their underclothes, which they might do only once every 3 or 6 months, well, these are monks we're talking about here, they give off a fragrance that fills the entire house as if a refreshing vial of myrrh had been opened. This is a sign from God of their blessed chastity and most holy virginity. Yeah, so it's a there's even though it's a very difficult struggle, but it also has a lot of reward, a lot of fragrance, and from this passion in this.
My sweet mom, she lived to be 96.
Oh yeah,
That's true.
yeah. Oh yeah. Wow.
Nothing.
Yeah.
He's really, really couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Did you guys hear that online? I think they probably did. I'll just say she was just saying how her grandmother, even if she was 96, for the last 2 3 years, she never took a shower. She didn't want to, but she was still, fragrant. And yeah, so this is something that this is the supernatural kind of thing, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, thank God. Okay, so moving on now to page 90. There's now Abba Daniel. Um, there's a monk there who had this passion of stealing things from the other monks, and so yeah, I mean, well, they're human, yeah. So just because you're in a monastery doesn't mean you're already holy. I mean, they say, they say that a monastery is it's like a hospital where you go, where the sick people go, where for intensive care. And so of course it's very possible to make a lot of progress much faster in a monastery because you have so much support and help. But that doesn't mean that simply because you're there, you've already made all that progress. So yeah. So anyway, so this monk, they had an idea. Okay, so that you don't have to steal anything from the other monks. I'll give you everything you need, whether it's gold or coins or clothes or anything. Just I'll give you everything you need. And so he did, but he kept stealing, even though he had everything he needed. And this is sort of like that story in Abydos, where there was that monk who would steal scraps of food, and it wasn't because he was hungry. It was just because there was this passion of stealing. It was so enjoyable that I guess the excitement of or being able to outsmart the other guys and steal their stuff. It was just so exciting that it was a passion. It's sort of like how we can be addicted to like a video game because it's so exciting. I guess this is their version of being addicted to a video game. So what?
A sport.
Yeah, like a sport. Yeah, I guess it is like a sport. Yeah.
There's rich kids that will steal just because.
Oh, just because it's exciting. Yeah. Yeah, and so then they end up. So then when they saw that he was still stealing stuff, even though he had everything, the elders decided to expel him. And then they said, if a brother is found at fault through some weakness, he should be tolerated. But if he steals and does not stop when he is warned, expel him, for he is both damaging his own soul and disturbing everybody in the place. And so the principle here is that there are some sins that we should be patient with and others we shouldn't be patient with. And so, for example, wait, let me get this. So the Holy Fathers say that what really matters is that well, everybody has weaknesses, but the question is, are your weaknesses harming other people in the monastery? And so, for example, if this is what Saint Isidore of Seville taught, and this is before the schism, so this is Orthodox. He says, even if someone is immersed in the abyss of repeated and most serious vices, still he must not be cast out of the monastery, but restrained in keeping with the type of sin, in case he who could have been amended by a penance of a long duration should, on being cast out, be devoured by the devil's mouth. So in other words, if this person can be benefited by the monastery and he's not harming other people, well, then he shouldn't be kicked out. Because, I mean, a simple example is, suppose a person is very, very negligent in prayer. He just doesn't pray. He just doesn't go to church. He's not really harming anybody. He's really just harming himself. Although I suppose his example is not doing anybody any good. But but he's not really harming. And or also suppose if a person has, is full of prideful thoughts, but he's not really acting on them. He likes daydreaming of, oh, wouldn't it be great if I were king? That's what he just does all day. He's not. I mean, obviously, it's sin. It's harming himself, but it's not really harming other people. So they say, okay, we don't need to kick him out. But then the Holy Father say, if someone does have something that's harmful, then you do need to kick them out. So, for example, there's Saint John of Rila, who is in Bulgaria, says, if somebody is found among you in the monastery who sows weeds, discords, and other temptations, you have to eliminate at once such a man from your assembly, so this will not be transfigured into a devouring canker, according to the apostle, and not to spread the evil among the good ones. And so yes, and there also in the ladder of divine ascent, there's also a time when one of the monks spoke badly of another monk, and as soon as the abbot heard about that, he kicked him out and said immediately, he says, I'm not having a visible devil here along with the invisible one. Actually, the reason why he called him a devil is because in Greek the word diavolos means slanderer. So the literal meaning of devil in Greek is slanderer. So he was slandering, and so that's why he says, okay, we already have the devil, the slanderer. We don't need also you joining forces with him and making things worse. So the Holy Fathers do say there is a time to kick out someone out of the monastery if they're harming the rest of the flock.
Wasn't Saint extremely selective of who you also allowed to enter his synagogue?
Oh well.
Like I remember.
Well, actually,
people would come and ask me, I wanted
to. Yeah. Well, actually, no. It's actually the opposite for him. For Saint Joseph the Hesychast, he would let everybody. He would let all the people who are crazy or deluded or possessed, and he let them all come and join him. But the reason why none of them stayed is because he wouldn't give them any food. Well, I mean, he'd give them just the same food that he would have, which is like nothing. And so they couldn't bear it, and then they wouldn't sleep either. They'd be up all night praying, and so people after a short time they'd be like, oh, we're out of here, forget it. And that's why when Elder Ephraim went there, when he told the guy in the boat, I'm gonna go to Elder Joseph, and he looks at him and says, you are going to Elder Joseph? Your hands are gonna fall off all the crosses you make up there, because that's part of their prayer. They make the cross like 1,000 or like several thousand times. He said your hand's gonna fall off. Your feet are, So yeah, so he was actually very. But I assume, but I'm sure that if there were someone that actually harming the rest of the brotherhood, he would kick them out. But in general, he didn't need to kick them out because they kicked themselves out. They couldn't manage. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, Elder Saint Joseph even said that he felt sorry for all these people who are possessed or that all the people that no one liked because they had difficult characters. He felt sorry for them. So he'd gather them all, and so he'd have a bunch of losers with him. And but then he was saying that I was trying to make real people out of these possessed or whatever people, these crazy people, but it's impossible. They can't become real people. They're just beyond help. So he said, that's why I said to myself, well, let me get some good people, some good kids, and make some good monks out of them. That's when he had Elder Ephraim, our Elder Ephraim, and Father Joseph, Father Haralambos. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we better stop there because it's already running out of time. So yeah. So we'll continue with page 91 when we next week. And so we finished up page 92 for today, so we can go another 10 pages. So we can go up to page 102 up to where Heladios is. Okay. So same time, at 10:30 Chicago time. All right. All right. Through the prayers of Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, your God, have mercy. Amen.